Hey, Scott Lewis here. I just wanted to jump in your feed quickly to give you a preview of a new season of Good Schools for All. Yes, we are back. If you like the Voice of San Diego podcast, I think you'll like this one too. The show is all about local schools and education, how schools work, how they don't. And this season, the co-host is our education reporter, Will Huntsberry. For this season, Will and I are going to tackle some of the biggest stories Voice has worked on over the past year. And for this season, we also have a new style, a little more produced, and we think you'll like it. So what you're going to hear now is the first half of the first story for the season. It just came out. This one's about one school in San Diego we've covered. It's on California's list of lowest performing schools. That's Porter Elementary. Will Huntsberry found out what exactly is happening at the school and how people are trying to turn it around. Enjoy. This is Good Schools for All, a show from Voice of San Diego about education, how schools work, how they don't. I'm Scott Lewis. Nearly 500 schools in California are underperforming in most or all of the ways the state tracks them. They're on a list of schools that are failing. We have the story of one of those schools, Porter Elementary School in San Diego. This week, what happens when schools fail, with education reporter Will Huntsberry. Will, hello.
Scott, hi.
What do we need to know to understand this story?
Well, I think where you have to start with this story to understand it is a list of schools that the state puts out pretty regularly. And it's a list of schools that are struggling, to speak quite frankly. And there's nearly 500 schools that are underperforming on every metric or nearly every metric that the state tracks. So we're not just talking about test scores. We're talking about schools that have really bad suspension rates, really bad absentee rates, also really bad English and math test scores. And the state's new system for tracking this stuff is evolving.
So when we say really bad or they're not performing up to standard, does that mean the state has literally drawn a line of what that standard is?
Yes, the state has drawn a line. We have something called the California Schools Dashboard, where your school can either score red, orange, yellow, or green in all these different metrics. And so any school that ends up on this list, it's red in every category or every category but one. And that's nearly 500 schools on the list for that reason. High schools can also get on the list if they have a graduation rate of less than 67%. So that's another 300 schools. The reason we keep this list is because the federal government under President Obama told states, you have to track the most underperforming schools in your state. You have to put out that list. And I think the reason is really clear. It's so we can keep a focus on these schools and make sure that we're doing something urgent to help turn them around.
Okay. Where did this story begin?
Yes. So around the same time, I was starting to get really interested in this list and following a school on it. A guidance counselor from Porter Elementary here in San Diego contacted me.
And Porter is on the list.
That's right. Porter is on the list. It's one of 9 traditional public schools in our area that are on the list. And so, I'm sitting there thinking as a reporter, like, how do I follow what's actually going on inside these schools? And around that same time, somebody named Kishana Christopher.
I'm Kishana Christopher, and I'm a counselor for city schools.
Reached out to me, and she told me the school was really having problems. And she said there were 2 things in particular she really wanted me to pay attention to. And, the first thing she was telling me is that the school's not safe.
What concerned me the most, it largely was safety. And complaints about safety.
It's just there are regular problems where a student is having a really tough day and they act out in class, and then that shuts down the whole class for an hour because there isn't a plan in place for what to do with that student, and she even talked about one instance of a student, a really young student, bringing a knife to school and it being the same thing.
Repeatedly vandalize or terrorize the classroom, making it an unsafe learning environment, and the teacher is unable to teach.
Everyone's day was being affected by these safety issues. All the students who were there to learn, all the teachers who were there to teach, and there weren't great plans in place to deal with it. And the other thing she told me about was special education services. She told me that students would go into their IEP meetings, and that's where it's a meeting that every student who has special needs, they have a meeting like this, and they're supposed to get a very specific education plan to help them overcome whatever deficits they might have. And Miss Christopher, she goes into all these meetings, right? She's the guidance counselor. And what she's telling me is just really astounding. She's telling me that when parents are asking for services or asking to be tested for services, school administrators are systematically denying or delaying these requests.
And I get that, but if they are legitimately qualifying for services, then there shouldn't be any denial of that. I can see if, they don't qualify, they don't qualify. But if they legitimately qualify for services, why make it difficult? Why delay the process? Why let them go year after year with the achievement gap growing? Each year they don't get the help they need.
So you are already looking at this list, and then by coincidence, this woman reaches out to you from a school that's on the list?
That's exactly right, yeah.
And she brings up these concerns, and what other things are going on at that school?
Well, so after I talked to Keyshawn and Christopher, I, of course, wanted to talk to parents and see what it was like for parents in this school. And I was able to reach out to a few different ones and get them to talk to me about their really personal experiences. One amazing person I talked to was Monique Hayes, and she's a parent who's trying really, really, really hard to get services for her 3 children who go to the school. But like a lot of parents in Porter Elementary, she does not have a lot of resources. She does not have a lot of money, and she doesn't necessarily have the infinite time and energy that it takes to pressure a school to give you what you need as a parent, right? But I think her children provide a really good lens into what's happening at the school. So Porter is in Lincoln Park here in San Diego, and that is an area, with a lot less resources than the rest of the city, and schools that have historically struggled. And one thing you need to know about the school is it's divided into 2 campuses. There's a north and a south campus, one for the older kids, one for the younger kids. And Monique Hayes has children at both sides of the campus. And each day when the school gets out, there's a big transfer of students between campuses. And so as she's picking up her kids every day, she told me just in this school year alone, she's broken up 3 fights between kids on this field that's in between the schools. And so she's telling me there's a really bad supervision issue. Like there's not enough people out there paying enough attention. Otherwise, why is she as a parent having to break up this stuff and be on top of this stuff, right?
And what else did this parent, Monique Hayes, tell you about?
She really talked to me about some problems that spiraled together for her regarding safety and attendance and special services for one of her children. So her older child was apparently being bullied by another kid at school. And this is not something that Miss Hayes knew about. It had been going on for weeks and weeks and weeks. And then one day her son got kicked in the head by this person who he'd been having confrontations with. And immediately she showed up to the school after hearing about what had happened, and she's like really wanting to know what's going on. She's asking staff, she's asking her son, or her son's being a little cagey because, that stuff is so sensitive. And the teacher there tells her, these kids have been having problems for a while. And so she kind of flies off the handle because she's like, okay, they've been having problems for a while. Like, why haven't I been contacted? Around that same time, her younger son's teacher recommends that he be tested for reading issues. And Ms. Hayes is like, sure, if that's what you think, let's test him. Let's get him the services that he needs. And they organize a meeting about this with the school counselor, the teacher, the mom, the parents, the administrators. And the administrators tell her, your son's having an attendance problem. And we don't really think that we should be testing for this stuff if he's having attendance problems. Why don't you see if you can improve his attendance, and then we'll think about testing him for reading problems. And they walk out of the meeting, and Miss Hayes is talking to the teacher who had made the recommendation immediately. And she's like, so what happened? And the teacher was like, well, they don't want to do it. They're not going to do the testing right now. And when you request testing, school's supposed to have 15 days to make sure that testing happens. And so what Miss Hayes had to do was kind of go on this letter writing, emailing campaign after the meeting had ended to ensure that her son got the tests he needed so he'd get the services he needed for reading.
Now, was he missing classes or just late, or what was the situation with that?
Well, he was having late issues, but they were also missing classes some because of the older son who was just so horrified at the prospect of going to school. Sometimes he's just like impossible to get out of the house, impossible to get dressed, and then everybody ends up missing school. So I think it was a combination of both.
And she would say part of the reason is because the environment was so insecure.
That's right. Yeah, because it was so unsafe.
What else did you learn about the situation that Porter finds itself in? The chronic absenteeism isn't limited to just him.
When you look at the stats for Porter Elementary, the school has really high chronic absenteeism. And over the years in education, I've watched this evolution, and I know you have too, Scott, where there's been a real push away from we're going to solely look at a school's test scores and give it an A through F grade based on that. So in this spirit of more nuanced data, California has started considering absenteeism and suspension data alongside test scores in its kind of effort to gauge how healthy a school is, right? But when we look at a school like Porter and we see red for suspension data, red for absentee data, red or orange for test scores, we can look at that school and see that there's something not right going on there, right? That means kids are getting suspended more than they're getting suspended at other schools. Usually these suspensions have racial disparities embedded in them where black kids are getting suspended more than else, and black boys especially. And so dealing with these problems obviously is complex.
Yeah, so you've got the counselor speaking out, which itself is news. She's spoken to a reporter. You have the data about the school. You have this parent's experience. You have all kinds of things that have come together that each almost could be their own story. You managed to get a story together. What was the reaction to that?
Yeah, well, I was really pleased that there was reaction to it. Sometimes you do a story you think's really important and it doesn't always pan out that way, but the local NAACP got involved, and they had kind of been tracking the problems a little bit already, but then after the story came out, they went to visit the campus. Keshana Christopher, the guidance counselor, was giving them a tour of the campus, and the principal and somebody else confronted this group as they were walking across campus and was like, you can't do this right now. You need to either be in Miss Christopher's office or you need to not be on this campus at all. And that same day, the superintendent for all of San Diego Unified School District, Cindy Martin, was on campus. And that's because people were starting to kind of come together to say, like, what is going on here? What's happening? And the NAACP wanted to get involved and be a part of that conversation.
Thanks for listening to the preview of Good Schools for All. You can hear the rest of the story now wherever you're listening to this show. Whatever app that is, just search Good Schools for All. For this season, we'll have a new episode every 2 weeks, so be sure to subscribe.